Welcome to the Wellness Creator Podcast. In today's episode, we are talking about Meta's big censorship announcement that took place on January 7th, 2025, and how it impacts wellness creators.
Hey everyone. I want to talk about something important today because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression. And I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship.
Whoop, Sandy, this is a big one.
I just fell out of bed when I heard it. I just could not believe, I literally couldn't believe what he was saying. And me, for one, I'm so happy about that. I know not everyone is, but I am thrilled that he's come out and said it, that there was censorship, that there were issues, and we're making changes. So, yeah. We can.
This is an incredibly controversial topic, and we really want this podcast episode to be about the impact to those of us in the health and wellness industry in particular, and creators online who are using these platforms specifically to grow our audience for our business, because health and wellness creators had a disproportionate impact, I think, due to censorship in the last 5 years. So let's just go ahead and get into it, Sandy. So what Mark Zuckerberg talked about, which you just heard the first minute of, like really a 5 or 6 minute video that Meta released on January 7th, is that they are retracting their content moderation policies. They are kind of cutting ties with the teams of people who have been creating and implementing those policies, effectively creating a layer of censorship. Whether you think that's good or bad, we can get into, for the last, really since 2016 is when they started those policies. So 8 years. So 7-8 years, they've been actively censoring, sort of in increasing capacity, the commentators, the comments, and the people who use Meta platforms. So we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about Instagram, and we're talking about WhatsApp.
Yep. Yeah. So he does say that it became too politically biased, the people that were doing the fact checkers, which I thought was so interesting, right? Like, they're not very good fact checkers if they are influenced by their political beliefs. And he does say, like, they're sort of loosening or widening their filter so that the regular common person, when they talk about, I don't know, a vitamin or something that's helped them with their mental illness, that they're not going to get censored and their posts won't disappear. Like, it was just insane to me.
Yeah.
So I 100% am behind this, and I think it's super exciting. I think it's so interesting, Jenny, how he's just like my friend, Elon at X, we're going to copy what he's done.
Yeah.
And it's also shocking to me, which I 100% love the community.
Community notes.
Community notes on X. Like, I think they're good.
Yeah.
And I think it's based on that the majority of people who are using these platforms are not bad people, are not trying to spread lies or misinformation. I think the majority are good, honest people trying to participate, but there's a few bad actors out there who are responsible for all this nonsense that's been going on.
Yeah. And just to kind of like summarize their main message, what Mark Zuckerberg said, and I really encourage you to go and listen to the full announcement. It's on Meta's website in their press releases. We will link to it in the show notes. It's worth 5 minutes of your time because it's such an important announcement affecting how billions of people in the world communicate with each other. And what he's essentially saying is out of like goodwill and wanting to be ethical, implemented these content moderation policies in 2016. 2016 was obviously a really pivotal year. It was the election where Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. The world was in a very politically tumultuous place. I think at least America was. That's my perspective. But I think the whole world felt the weight of that political decision. There was a lot of fear and talk about things like Russian interference in the US presidential election that year. And so there was like this huge push to implement content moderation. There were also like increasing stories about bots, coming in and like really, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that there was profound misinformation on the platform, like that caused things like genocides. And we don't want to take, that all needs to be put in context. And I think you have to think about these platforms like Facebook. And I will work very hard to forgive Mark Zuckerberg for what has happened in the last 8 years, but it's hard. But you have to think about the position that these tech founders and these tech companies have been in for really the first time in human history to sort of like have the dials and controls to sort of decide how people can communicate with each other at this scale. And I think that like we as humans are figuring this out, right, as a civilization. And I certainly, I think it's really worth paying attention to, especially if you're in the health and wellness field, because this will affect what you are allowed to say and how you are allowed to say it and communicate it to your audience.
Yeah, you no longer need to speak in code or use
we'll see, right? We'll see how they actually implement community notes. But yes, I mean, that's the idea. Like, if you have spent any time on Facebook in a Facebook group, or, following major wellness influencers on Instagram, that people use cupcakes for they use the cupcake emoji for vaccines, and they use like a horse for ivermectin. And I'm sure that this video, when it's on YouTube, this podcast is going to have all kinds of warnings on it because I said those words out loud. But like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I think we've all, I don't know, anyone in this industry has seen, I have personally witnessed my own words disappearing as I post them, right? Like, and that is a very unsettling feeling. And so this is a really big deal.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. Like,
yeah.
So a huge deal.
A huge deal. But it also, we're going to now have to see like, okay, how like we've seen how community notes deal with, calls, like fake calls for genocidal violence that people think are real. We've seen that play out on X.
Let's explain community notes for those who don't spend any time on it.
Community notes is a different kind of content moderation system where it's sort of like a collective way where people can fact check, and it's not delegated to like an Ivy League university or a major research university or think tank that has a singular kind of political motivation and is funded by a certain group of people, right? Like that's been the real critique of Meta, is that those fact-checking organizations have bias baked into them because they are funded by certain organizations and individuals with a particular agenda. At least that is the claim. And so I'm sure to a degree that that's true, right? Like,
yeah,
there's
sure.
That's true. You may agree with the values and judgments of those funders and organizers, but it's definitely biased. And so, we've seen Mark Zuckerberg testify in front of Congress repeatedly about misinformation, disinformation, censorship. And I think like this was such a change in his demeanor. Like, it's also worth pointing out, Sandy, because we are us, that like he looks like a different person. Can we just talk about
he sounds like a different person.
He's
His
like
voice,
and he's like a cage fighter now.
Yeah.
And he's wearing $1 million watch. That's one of the things that I saw somebody posted.
Really?
At least like that's what I read. The
watch?
He's wearing like a t-shirt with a big old gold necklace and $1 million wristwatch in this video, which is like, and he is buff and he's got long hair,
long and curly.
Oh my God. It's so, he looks like we've seen this like sort of weaselly young nerdy man testifying before Congress for years.
He was
like,
ready
what
to
the
take
heck?
on Elon. They were going to fight.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. They were going to do a fight, an MMA fight or whatever. Like, honestly, but
just to be clear, like for those people who haven't been on X, like that, those community notes, or someone posts something
Yeah.
and you as a person go, oh, that's an old video, or I can
Yeah.
tell that that's been doctored, or I don't,
Yeah.
like this, whatever. You can
Here's
add
the
your input.
original. Yeah.
Right. Like this was shown 3 years ago and didn't happen yesterday, like they're implying. And so the
Yeah.
community, the people kind of chime in and go, actually be careful of this. I actually saw something that was first like an ad
Mhm.
selling something, and it was like a little bit sketchy, and someone was like, be careful of this, and here's what my experience was. And so it's like policed by the people. And
Yeah.
one could say that people could really be negative and take a company down, for example. It just doesn't seem to happen though. It's like we're adults and we can like read the information and decide what we want to believe, or what we can go check further if we want, like I actually really liked that feature on X. I loved it. So the fact that he's basically copying Elon and bringing that in I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I will just play devil's advocate. You know,
Mhm.
you and I agree on a lot of things, Sandy, but just like we do know from Frances Hogan's book,
Yeah.
like there are people in other countries that get their
Yes.
news from Facebook, right? And
Yes.
so I think the danger, and I'm sure that that's true for X too, and we can all go back and talk about, I taught a course back when I was still teaching at a university about the impact of Twitter on Arab Spring, like, and the political uprisings of Arab Spring. Like, it's a real thing. So there are people
Sure.
in the world who get their news from these platforms. And I think that there is a real danger in like just believing everything that you read. So even with community notes and even with the content moderation policies that Facebook has been using for years and years, like it's still like, I mean, even newspapers, like there's, I just don't believe everything you read. And I think that, but there's people who do, and that's their
Yeah.
only source of
And
information
it's
about
the
the
only
world.
source of information,
Yeah.
because Facebook won't, like, the charge to go on an internet browser and look
Yeah.
anywhere else is
Yeah.
exorbitant.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's free
And
to go
there's,
on Facebook.
yeah.
So there's a whole other
So
issue
that
with
is
that.
highly problematic. But I
Yeah.
did want to say, I found a post before we started recording, Sandy, about how well community notes have been used on X. And this is taken from Grok, which is X's AI arm. So, I mean, again, it could be anything could be doctored or whatever, but this is what it said. So in 1 year, X has suspended 5.3 million accounts
Wow.
because of community notes and removed 10.6 million violating posts that violate their community standards. So that's like pretty substantial.
That is.
And suspensions have tripled since the first half of 2022, I guess when this started, or when this started getting tracked. So I would just say, like, there is some data to support that this is an impactful way of policing misinformation or disinformation.
So in Mark's, I think this is actually the CEO that is written, the sort of the post below this video. He says in December 2024, they removed millions of pieces of content every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. And he says in that clip that we just listened to at the beginning, that even if their algorithm is making a mistake 1% of the time, it's still like millions and millions and millions of mistakes. And people know it and feel it. Like if you say anything that is like within the health and wellness realm, there's a chance that you're going to get censored, because this is the kind of stuff, again, that gets censored, that has historically gotten censored for whatever reason. And some people are going to say that it's because like the same people who fund big pharma, or who are shareholders in big pharma companies, are the people who've been funding these misinformation entities and university groups, right? Like that's the, like in the wellness world, like that's the going theory, is that like big pharma is essentially behind the censorship of wellness related content. So who knows? None of us are in those rooms. Most likely, if you're listening to this, you have no idea what's actually going on, just like we don't. But, we have our fears and suspicions.
Yeah. And he did say, and I can't remember the exact words of the team, but he's moving his like ethics team.
Yeah.
It's going to be out of Texas, so that it's not all out of California, as you were describing,
so
for the bias reason. So that
was one of the most shocking things that I heard yesterday. I mean, that's a really, like, just to say though, that these organizations that Meta was outsourcing to were also, like, I know the University of Washington, where I used to teach, had one of these kind of organizations that was working with Facebook around misinformation. And then I think Stanford has an arm. And so it wasn't just employees at Meta. It was also like, interestingly, being outsourced. This kind of content policing and content moderation was being outsourced to these kind of university affiliated entities that,
right.
If you've ever been around one of them, they're all funded by foundations and wealthy people. So it like lends itself to potentially to corruption because anyway, that's how those things work.
Yeah. Okay. Let's bring it back around to like the positive impact of this change. Like, how will it help our listeners with their wellness business? What are the implications?
So one of the things that we were talking about in preparing for this episode is sort of like why this matters for wellness creators. And it's because a big part of why all of you have businesses, not all of you, but many of you, is because you've had some kind of impact or transformation in your own life that you are then wanting to use as kind of the fuel and the training to help you impact other people, right? So maybe not every single one of you, but many of you are in the line of work that you're in the wellness world because you were personally impacted by some kind of illness, disease, affliction, trauma, whatever it may be. And you learned a strategy or two to overcome those things and create positive change. And you want to use that as fodder or, as a way to help other people. Well, part of this sort of like censorship industrial complex really like prevented you from doing that, like many of you from doing that. And so we're well aware of that. We've had lots of conversations with our clients in our coaching programs over the years about this stuff. And even when you're sharing your own experience, that was often something that you would get penalized for, maybe lose your Instagram account for, certainly have your Facebook ads shut off for. So that is that it will be really interesting to see how this particular aspect plays out moving forward, because especially if it's around anything related to alternative medicine, alternative healing, herbalism, like anything that is outside of like the sort of traditional pharmaceutical kind of like condoned solutions. And then even then, talking about any kind of cure or healing or whatever, there's all these words that you can't say, right? So it'll be interesting to see if this shifts, because I see those things all the time on X. I spend a fair amount of time on that platform and people can say those words. So like you couldn't say it on Facebook. And I've talked about it before, Sandy, with you in other podcasts we've recorded, that like part of why I wanted to get off of Instagram and why I have actively despised Meta in recent years, and Facebook in particular, is because I was actively censored from what I was saying in long COVID groups, which really were like about vitamins and protocols. Like people were unable to share, like entire groups would be shut down. They would just be gone the next day. I had the experience of like typing a sentence and posting it, and the sentence was gone within 30 seconds, like just mysteriously vanished. Like that kind of stuff is very unsettling. So as a wellness practitioner, healer, creator who is probably talking about some of these things, you are maybe now going to be able to tell your story.
Yeah. And I wonder how many of the listeners like who have realized that they've been sort of shut down and muted and have to be careful, and they just think that's normal. And like how, to me, it's so exciting that they can have these more open, honest, real conversations about their experience. As you say, typically it's going to be more in the alternative health world. Like, let's get the truth out there. And again, I think that we're adults and we can like hear it and go, I don't agree with any of that. And that's fine. Right. But I don't need Meta to be like censoring, that you shouldn't listen to that. Right. Like
that. I think that's going to be the like long-term story that comes out of these years, is that like none of us really know everything. I mean, okay, I just want to say this. Science is a process, not an outcome. And so if you are trying to control what information is available to people because certain words cannot be spoken, you're like, it's already so Orwellian, and you just, there's no entity on the planet that I am aware of that knows the answers to all the questions of how to heal all the people, right? So it's like, it's such a disservice to take options away from people who are wanting to learn. And I am a huge advocate, and I'll just say this because I think this relates to a lot of you in your businesses, especially those of you that are health coaches or you do any kind of like protocols or cleanses or whatever. You are doing work that is not mainstream condoned by big pharma, and therefore you have to just refrain from talking about it in a way that's meaningful. And I get that you can't, I get that, like, just like you can't yell fire in a movie theater when there's no fire, like, you don't want to overhype a claim, but I know so many of you from working with you over the years, and that's not how you all think and talk, right? You're like, this is my story. This worked for me. I want to let you know about it. And this like, this way of doing Pilates or this way of eating or whatever really helped me and my body. Here's what it is. Maybe it will help you. Maybe it won't. And that's how most people in wellness are.
Yeah.
And to not have been able to say those things out loud in the public marketplace of our time has been really damaging to people in their businesses.
Yeah.
And so
it's like they're trying to help people with thyroid issues, not take down the government. Like, it's just, here's a few more options, you know, here's some oils, here's some whatever that might help. And again, I just rely on the intelligence of all of us to read the information, decide for ourselves. But
and you're going to get community noted, right? If you're selling snake oil, you're going to get community noted, and so that's what happens. I mean, to a degree on X, it's like doesn't always happen, but I also think like we're adults, and so we need to be able to like look at information and think and make decisions, and so. Anyway, if we were centered around geopolitical upheaval, Sandy, you and I maybe would be having a different conversation about this, but we see the world through the lens of wellness because that's the world we live and work in. And so that's that's the angle that we're going to bring to this analysis of this news story.
And the only really uncertainty is like timing, because Mark in that video talks about like these are complex systems and it's going to take a little bit for us to try and, improve this and get this right. So I really don't know if it's like weeks, months, a year, like what that will be, but we'll certainly follow along with any other updates with him. But hopefully it's sooner.
So just, later. And that, I think, that's a great point, just to follow the story. If you're in this industry, I think you're going to see the way people talk about wellness on the internet change. I mean, it's going to go back to pre-2016. If for those of you that were spending time online back then in the blogosphere, like on, in kind of like chat rooms and forums. And that was a really cool time to be on the internet. Honestly, like it was really fun. So there was a lot of like sharing. Oh, and I just also want to say like patient advocacy and like people who, this is one of those places for you to think about as a business opportunity. Facebook groups have been the primary place for like patient advocacy communities or communities like community advocacy groups where people are all kind of suffering through the same thing, whether it's like postpartum depression or whatever affliction it may be. There are Facebook groups have been the home on the internet for those communities by and large. So I just think about like, we have a community built into Marvelous. And part of why we built communities is so that you can avoid censorship and talk about what you want. So thinking about though, like how can you use this idea of community with these changes to start to like, build an audience or grow your audience even bigger, because maybe this is going to be an option once again.
Yeah. And I think the question I would love to ask our listeners is like, what would you do, or who would you be, or what would you say if you didn't have the fear of being shadow banned or your account being shut down suddenly, like you've seen so many of your colleagues, that's happened. Like, just imagine what you can be as a leader in this space and as a thinker, a content creator, if you just don't have to be so careful that you might like lose everything overnight. Like that is exciting.
Yeah. And I mean, I love the idea that you brought up shadow banning, because that's where it's shown up a lot too. Like it's not always explicit that your
people are so confused,
was taken down or that your account was closed. Sometimes it's just that no one can see what you post anymore. So that's a really good point. And I also think like just jumping to YouTube for a second, because I think that we're going to hear news from them soon. Like I think that's the big elephant in the room now is like YouTube content demonetization related in this space. So it'll be really interesting to see if Google now starts to shift its own policies, because I think they were working with the same think tanks and organizations that Meta was working. It's like the sort of the same people who were, and some of it was being pushed by the federal government in the United States, and I don't know where else. And so those things are changing. And so it'll be really interesting to see, like, beyond Meta, how these changes take place.
Like, I already know, I'm thinking, like, you mentioned ivermectin, and I don't know if Google's going to let us play this on YouTube, right?
They'll probably, it definitely wouldn't be monetized if we were monetized, and it definitely will have a warning about COVID. Let's see, I didn't say the word out loud. Let's see if we get a little warning when you post this. That's my suspicion, but it might get taken down also, or we might get a warning. So, I mean, part of this is just the reality of the world that we're in, but we should try, you and I left Instagram, Sandy, largely because of the censorship. And not even that we were being censored, but just the observation of other people being censored was so troubling to us. It was so disgusting that for things that were really
so many doctors I follow who lost their accounts, and I see them posting now on Instagram, like, oh my God, hopefully I won't ever have this happen again. And like, they're just so confused, as like they're talking about iodine or something, and they're like, gone,
and then it's what? So, I know, or
anyway,
like red light therapy or something. And you get your account shut down. It's crazy.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So
that is insane. Okay. So story is evolving. We'll keep you posted, but definitely encourage everyone to head over to that link and watch the whole video with Mark, like he's my friend, Mark Zuckerberg. And we'll keep pushing the boundaries with this and see what we can post on Google.
Yeah. And we'll keep you updated too, as obviously we're following these kinds of stories. And if anything additionally exciting happens in this space, we'll be sure to record another episode in the future. And I just encourage all of you to, again, go watch that 5-minute video and look at some of the other links that we share of analysis that people are doing on this. And just like, this is a major shift for our industry on the internet. So just please pay attention. Let us know how it affects you. And we'll just continue the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sandy. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.